Shoghi Effendi writes, he says, wishing to stress the sublimity of the Bab's exalted station as compared with that of the prophets of the past, Baha'u'llah in the Igan asserts, no understanding can grasp the nature of his revelation, nor can any knowledge comprehend the full measure of his faith. My goodness. He then quotes in confirmation of his argument the prophetic words from Islam. This is the quotation. Knowledge is 27 letters. Knowledge is 27 letters. All that the prophets have revealed are 2 letters thereof. No man thus far hath known more than these 2 letters. But when the Qa'im shall arise, he will cause the remaining 25 letters to be made manifest. Baha'u'llah then adds, behold how great and lofty is his station. His rank excelleth that of all the prophets, and his revelation transcendeth the comprehension and understanding of all their chosen ones. He further adds, of his revelation, of the Bab's revelation, the prophets of God, his saints and chosen ones, have either not been informed, or in pursuance of God's inscrutable decree, they have not disclosed. Baha'u'llah, also in the Igan, and this is a very interesting, I was talking yesterday about Mr. Qadem's pilgrimage. One of the Afnan ladies who had inherited the original Igan that was written to the uncle of the Bab had this manuscript in hand. And on the visit of Janabi Samandari to Shiraz, she presented it to him to give to the guardian so that he would have the original in the hand of Abdul Baha to send to the Holy Land. And Mr. Samandari sent it to the National Assembly. They advised the guardian. The guardian said, do not send this in the mail, in the train, it's too wait. We will wait for a trustworthy person to bring it in the future. And when Janabi Qadem had applied for pilgrimage, the guardian instructed the NSA to give him the copy of the Igan to bring to his presence. Dr. Chukari was in the Holy Land at the table of the guardian. He was a liaison member of the International Bahai Council, living abroad, was already, of course, a hand of the cause, in touch with the guardian on a regular basis. He said that evening, the guardian brought the Igan to the pilgrim table, and he opened the bokche, the fancy silk it was enwrapped in, and showed us the Igan. The Igan is about the size of a hand. It's not big, but it's fairly thick. It's written in this beautiful handwriting of Abdul Baha. In the margins, Shoghi Effendi had pointed out to Dr. Chukari and the other pilgrims that were there, Baha'u'llah in his own hand has added a few notes here and there and corrected something, changed something slightly. And the largest amendment to the Igan is a passage in the margin that he's added in his own hand, in Baha'u'llah's own hand. And I'm going to quote that to you now. And Shoghi Effendi was so thrilled to see that that was in Baha'u'llah's own hand. He said he had the copy of the Igan, but not with showing which were the editions. It was an Egyptian edition of the Igan that he used. a copy that Zane had made, but it didn't include showing changes, it just put the final copy. And he said, I had chosen a verse from that to adorn the title page of Nabil's narrative. And how delighted I was to see that this was in Baha'u'llah's own hand in the margin of the Iqan. Amidst them all, Baha'u'llah wrote, we stand in hand, life in hand, wholly resigned to his will, that perchance through God's loving kindness and grace, this revealed and manifest letter, referring to himself, may lay down his life as a sacrifice in the path of the primal point, the most exalted word. Shoghi Effendi has added in parenthesis, the Bab, the most exalted word. By him at whose bidding the Spirit hath spoken, but for this yearning of our soul, we would not for one moment have tarried any longer in this city. This is the city being Baghdad, where the revelation of the Iqan took place, in the most great house. Shoghi Effendi in the dispensation, after quoting this, he says, so resounding a praise, so bold an assertion issued by the pen of Baha'u'llah in so weighty a work are fully re-echoed in the language in which the source of the Babi revelation has chosen to clothe the claims he himself has advanced. Friends, the Guardian sent his selection of prayers and meditations to the American Baha'i community for publication in English in his translation some years ago, back in the 30s. And he said to the friends in a message, he said he hoped that this book alone, Prayers and Meditations by Baha'u'llah, would enable the friends to draw nigh unto Baha'u'llah, that he might draw nigh unto them. And I think these characteristic passages of the Bab about his own station enable us to draw nigh unto him, that he might draw nigh unto us. If the prophets of God, the manifestations of God, didn't announce to us who they were, how would we know who they were? Who could tell us who they were? Some people have said there that it seems immodest that they say they're the messenger of God and that they've been sent by God. But if they don't tell us who they are, how will we know? Baha'u'llah so himself announcing in the Haikal and later also in his tablets, where he speaks about his experience in the Siyad Chal and so on. And he describes how the Maid of Heaven points to him and announces him as the best beloved. And Shoghi Effendi calls that a personation of his own spirit. The angel is Baha'u'llah's own spirit that has taken the form of a maiden and made this announcement in a way that's modest compared to if he said, and verily, verily, I am the best beloved, although he says that later quite boldly himself in the Aktas. But for the opening description, he has this feminine figure announce his revelation and his station. Quite interesting to consider these short phrases that are there announcing who the Bab considers himself to be, who Baha'u'llah considers the Bab to be. How better could we approach and enhance our understanding and communion with the spirit of the Bab? I am the mystic fane, the Bab thus proclaims in the Qayyum al-Asma, which the hand of omnipotence hath reared. I am the lamp which the finger of God hath lit within its niche and caused to shine with deathless splendor. I am the flame of that supernal light, that glowed upon Sinai in the gladsome spot and lay concealed in the midst of the burning bush. Should it be our wish, the Bab again confirms, it is in our power to compel through the agency of but one letter of our revelation the world and all that is therein to recognize in less than the twinkling of an eye the truth of our cause. Central to all the revelations of God, central to our own teachings, is the principle of free choice on the part of man. He sets forth his revelations before us. He invites us to recognize him, but it depends on the soul of man whether they recognize or not. He doesn't. He could compel, as he says, in one moment everybody to submit, but he doesn't, because God has given us this possibility of participating in the sharing of the revelation. He invites us, and we have to respond. You people have responded. You've turned with your hearts. You've poured your energies into the faith. You have the full support of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, whose light, as we said yesterday, confirmed by Abdul Baha, is shining over all the friends. Again, the Bab says, and this time he was addressing Muhammad Shah himself, the king at the time, from Maku, I am the primal point from which have been generated all created things. What statement are we hearing here? The primal will is the cause of the creation of everything. Do you recall in the Lohe Hekmat, in the Tablet of Wisdom, Baha'u'llah states that creation is constantly being recreated. At every instant, God causes the world to be recreated. He is involved with us in maintaining us in our breath, in giving life to our thoughts and existence at every instant. So quickly is the repetition that we see it as a sequence. Extraordinary. In case you thought that he prepared this banquet for us and then went on a holiday or something. God doesn't go away. He's there constantly at the door of the heart, waiting to see who's going to respond. Abdul Baha says that as the soul rules and directs all the functions of the body, we think the body is independent of the soul. It exists solely because of the soul. As soon as the soul lifts off of the body, its influence is projected into the body. It lifts off the body comes apart, starts immediately decaying and corrupting. In the same way, he said that we are aware of the cells of our body, and we're immediately have conscious knowledge of everything that happens in our body. Nobody has to tell us, are you hot or are you cold? Or these are things we have, that kind of knowledge that Abdul Baha describes as immediate, intuitive knowledge. The manifestation of God at his level has all of the human race as the cells of his inner being. So he is in touch with the spiritual reality of all of us at every moment. Why is it that you can pray and he answers you, and this fellow over here can do it at the same time, and it doesn't seem to cause any difficulty for God through the manifestation of God, because he's ordained that through this manifestation of God, we should approach him and pray to him. We can pray directly to God, but Shoghi Effendi queries why we would do that when we have the very channel of God present amongst us to direct ourselves to the light of God coming through them. I am the countenance of God, whose splendor can never be obscured, the light of God, whose radiance can never fade. All the keys of heaven God hath chosen to place on my right hand, and all the keys of hell on my left. I am one of the sustaining pillars of the primal word of God. Whoever hath recognized me hath known all that is true and right, and hath attained all that is good and seemly. The substance wherewith God hath created me is not the clay out of which others have been formed. He hath conferred upon me that which the worldly wise can never comprehend, nor the faithful discover. To finish this review of the rank and position to the degree that we could comprehend it, I want to quote from the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, the repository of his last wishes and parting instructions. In a passage which Shoghi Effendi says has been specifically designed to set forth the guiding principles of Baha'i belief, we find these words, and he says they set the seal of his testimony on the Bab's dual and exalted station. Remember, we're talking again twofold station of the Bab. Those of you, maybe some of you weren't here yesterday, on the one hand, he's the herald of the glory of God that's about to appear, but on the other hand, he is an independent manifestation of God, the king of God's messengers. His title is from Baha'u'llah. What a position he has, friends. Abdu'l-Baha writes, the foundation of the belief of the people of Baha, may my life be offered up for them, is this. His Holiness, the Exalted One, is the manifestation of the unity and oneness of God, and the forerunner of the ancient beauty. His Holiness, the Abha beauty, of course, this is Baha'u'llah, may my life be offered up as a sacrifice for his steadfast friends, is the supreme manifestation of God and the dayspring of his most divine essence. Then Abdu'l-Baha adds significantly, all others are servants unto him and do his bidding. I wanted to conclude this section reading you a statement from Shoghi Effendi in the light of the things that we're hearing about, the magnitude of the range of the position of the Bab and subsequently of Baha'u'llah. Do we realize, friends, what a privileged position we are in with respect to human history itself? Perhaps we might have been born closer to one of the previous manifestations of God, but how can that compare to having been born in the cycle inaugurated by the King of the messengers of God? Our recognition may be preliminary, partial in some ways, but as we continually, in our devotions, in our prayers, in our service, in our sacrifice, the dawning light of the Bab and Baha'u'llah increases in our soul. And that light becomes manifest in our faces. And that light communicates to the people that we speak to and meet. And it piques their curiosity. Sometimes they recognize immediately, sometimes the words that we say are like seeds. The name of Baha'u'llah, the name Bahai, has a special place inside the soul that locks in when they hear it the first time. Shoghi Effendi says it goes into the subconscious and continues to act on the life of the person that might be entirely unaware of it, and eventually can produce changes in their lives. These are these seeds that we're planting everywhere as we teach and propagate the faith. Shoghi Effendi says, if the friends only realized there's only a few times in history when opportunities for mortal glory come to a people. And that time is now in their hands. We are the children at the formative age of the faith. We're involved in laying the foundations of the kingdom of God in so many ways that we don't even understand. But through obedience and submission, we carry out our mission. It's so important that we realize how much we need to dedicate our lives to spreading the cause, how there's nothing more important at all in our lives. And how, to the degree that we sacrifice, we attract divine confirmations. And how those confirmations are the unique source of attracting souls to the faith. If we teach the faith and people say, I'm not interested, or they don't show any interest, the problem is generally, friends, not the people we're talking to. It's our problem, that we are not shining enough with the faith that they would be awakened by it. And we constantly have to beg and submit ourselves to the holy threshold. Assist me to be confirmed. Assist me that my light might touch the hearts of others as you've commanded me to do. Any other activity, friends, is totally secondary compared to that because of the time we live in. Think of one of the architects working with the architect of the Chile temple, a Chilean woman. While she was working on the drawings in Canada, they needed to be stamped by the Chilean law and so on. She had several dreams of Baha'u'llah. She's a non-Baha'i. When we heard this, we said, why doesn't Baha'u'llah come and tell us these things? Why does he tell us? And she said, he came to me and he said that you must devote your life to this temple, building this temple. It's so important. He said, you will see within 500 years, all the people of South America will be Baha'is. Now, friends, who are we going to teach? If we were born in that time, who would we teach? You see why the privilege is ours, because we still can find souls that haven't heard of the cause. We can still be the first ones to communicate it. There's a tablet from Abdul Bahai. He says, the service of the friends belongs to God, not to them. Because anything that you imagine to do that's good has come from God. Think of the verses in the Gleanings. There's a tablet. He says, all good comes from God, and all evil comes from your own selves. Well, pretty clear explanation. It's a little strong to flip it, but I like to flip it because it makes us think. No evil comes from God. Everything God does is good. And no good comes from man. Everything he has is evil. We have to replace the evil, which is full of pride and passion and self-importance, with this confirmations of God. He says, empty yourself and you'll become a channel, and I'll use you to conquer the masses of the world. Have you tasted of that? We heard last night, if you just get the flavor of pioneering, you never want to stop doing it. And teaching is the same way, because we're all pioneers, even if it's a local activity that we're involved in. We should try to turn up the fire in ourselves. Shoghi Effendi said the friends should constantly be asking Baha'u'llah to guide them to receptive souls. Do you daily ask Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah, give me an opportunity today to give the cause to somebody else? If the friends realized this time in history that they're living, they would not for a moment busy themselves with idle conversation and gossip, but would sacrifice their all for the quickening of the people and the salvation of society. Life is a constant interchange Shoghi Effendi said it should be for each of the Baha'is to study and to teach. Study and teach. He said the Baha'i never reaches a time in their life when they shouldn't be studying the faith. Because through teaching those actions, you have acquired confirmations, the confirmations of the Holy Spirit. They expand consciousness. They enable us to see in words that we read previously, even last week, never mind 10 years ago. They open our eyes to new levels and dimensions. The same words are speaking to all the Baha'is at different levels of capacity. They address the needs that we have so that we can become full of sacrifice and draw nigh unto the Bab and Baha'u'llah in the process. One of the interesting parallels that Shoghi Effendi makes after describing the martyrdom of the Bab and the worldwide effects of his ministry and sacrifice, he draws a parallel with the life and acts of Christ, of Jesus Christ. I just wanted to present that to you briefly here. You can find it in God Passes By in the chapter on the martyrdom of the Bab. Shoghi Effendi explains, it would indeed be no exaggeration to say that nowhere in the whole compass of the world's religious history, except in the Gospels, do we find any record relating to the death of any of the religion founders of the past comparable to the martyrdom suffered by the Prophet of Shiraz. That's his opening here. So strange, so inexplicable a phenomenon attested by eyewitnesses, corroborated by men of recognized standing and acknowledged by government as well as unofficial historians among the people who had sworn undying hostility to the Babi faith, may be truly regarded as the most marvelous manifestation of the unique potentialities with which a dispensation promised by all the dispensations of the past had been endowed. And of course, this is a reference to the miraculous volleys that didn't touch the Bab and his disciple, Anis. The enemies of the faith saw this with their own eyes. Everybody saw it. Government officials, the consular services in Tabriz, they were present and saw these things and wrote about them. The passion of Jesus Christ, and indeed his whole public ministry alone, offer a parallel to the mission and death of the Bab, a parallel which no student of comparative religion can fail to perceive or ignore. And then he lists the points of similarity. In the youthfulness and meekness of the inaugurator of the Babi dispensation, in the extreme brevity and turbulence of his public ministry, in the dramatic swiftness with which that ministry moved towards its climax, in the apostolic order which he instituted and the primacy which he conferred on one of its members. Now, those of you who are familiar with Christian scriptures remember that Peter was appointed by Christ. He was called the rock upon which the faith of Christ would be established. So each one of these you need to know a little about Christianity, but you can find these again in God Passes By and look at the comparison. In the boldness of his challenge to the time-honored conventions, rites, and laws which had been woven into the fabric of the religion he himself had been born into. In the role which an officially recognized and firmly entrenched religious hierarchy played as chief instigator of the outrages which he was made to suffer. In the indignities heaped upon him, in the suddenness of his arrest, both like in the case of Christ as well, in the interrogation to which he was subjected, in the derision poured and the scourging inflicted upon him, in the public affront that he sustained, and finally, in his ignominious suspension before the gaze of a hostile multitude. Christ on the cross, the Bob on the walls of the military barracks. In all these, we cannot fail to discern a remarkable similarity to the distinguishing features of the career of Jesus Christ. What was the outcome, friends, of the Bob's ministry? I wanted to cite, let's see if we have here. You know, Baha'u'llah has so clearly stated that the Bab, with his coming, has released those energies which will quicken mankind and lead it to its maturity. And its maturity is the fruition of his ministry connected with that of Baha'u'llah. But it starts with the Bab. And Baha'u'llah says these energies will move us toward the kingdom of God on earth. I read last year a note from the diary of Keith Ransom Kaler. Keith Ransom Kaler was a pilgrim in the presence of the guardian and had been chosen by him to go to Iran in defense of the cause, to champion the cause. She was a college graduate, a very brilliant woman, a wonderful speaker. And Shoghi Effendi mentored her for 4 months in the Holy Land before he sent her to Iran. And she's kept notes of things that he told her. He says this startling thing to her, which she can hardly believe her ears when she hears. He asks her, "Do you think, Mrs. Kaler, that the coming of the kingdom of God on earth depends on the actions of the Baha'is?" Not at all. She's totally startled. She said, "You know, we're constantly being encouraged and told to move forward and help build the kingdom and so on." She said, "Well, if that doesn't do it, then why are we doing it?" He says, "You're doing it for you, not for him. It's going to come about whether you participate or not. But if you participate, you get to share in the glory of the whole affair." That results in the fact that teaching the cause of God, as Abdul Baha says in the Will and Testament, which may appear mysterious to us, he said it's the greatest gift of God. In the past, teaching religion was limited to certain groups in society, to clergy, to those who were recognized as learned in religious matters. Whereas today, he said it's the duty of every Baha'i to proclaim the cause of God. Though the action of proclaiming the cause of God, proclaiming the position of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, in a sacrificial manner, that is, in a manner that's not always comfortable to us, but requires sacrifice. Sacrifice of our time, sacrifice of our funds, sacrifice of our life goals. That, he said, to the degree that we sacrifice, attracts divine confirmations. Divine confirmations cause the soul of man to develop and grow. Abdul Baha says, you stop teaching the cause, the confirmations are cut off. If the confirmations are cut off, your spiritual growth stops. So he's giving us a formula. He's saying, you know, be constantly engaged in teaching the faith. Think about it 24 hours a day. Think about new souls that could hear the sublimity of God's proclamation from your mouths, that you might be the means of passing the spark and light that's in your own heart to their hearts, and therefore receive the confirmation, both of the light of Baha'u'llah and the light of the Bab. What's been the outcome? I want to share with you one sentence from Retrospect and Prospect, the last chapter of God Passes By. In one sentence, Shoghi Effendi surveys the effect from the time of the Shaky school all the way to this world community that's been generated by this process. This process which was energized through the life and sacrifice of the Bab. The outcome. A handful of students belonging to the Shaky school sprung from the Isna Ashariya sect of Shia Islam. Well, that sounds very difficult. Isna Ashariya, maybe you know, it means 12, the 12ers, those that believed in 12 imams, because there's some that believe in 5 and some believe in 7. We are the inheritors of the 12, belief in the 12 imams. So this handful of students sprung from the Isna Ashariya sect of Shia Islam had, in consequence of the operation of this process, been expanded and transformed into a world community. Then he characterizes the community in all these short phrases. He said, it's closely knit, it's clear of vision, alive, consecrated by the sacrifice of no less than 20,000 martyrs. Supranational, above nations, above nationhood. Non-sectarian, non-political, claiming the status and assuming the functions of a world religion, spread over 5 continents and the islands of the seas. Now, he's giving statistics here of 1944. You can hear them, but think of where we are now, with 180 national assemblies and so on. With ramifications extending over 60 sovereign states and 17 dependencies, equipped with a literature translated and broadcast in 40 languages. Now it's over 800. Exercising control over endowments representing several $1 million, but it's hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in endowments that we have all over the world. Recognized by a number of governments in both the East and the West. What a change from this handful of students that went out to discover the Bab. Integral in aim and outlook, possessing no professional clergy, professing a single belief, following a single law, animated by a single purpose, organically united through an administrative order, divinely ordained and unique in its features, including within its orbit representatives of all the leading religions of the world, of various classes and races, which this gathering is certainly representative of, faithful to its civic obligations, faithful to its civil obligations, conscious of its civic responsibilities, as well as of the perils confronting the society of which it forms a part, sharing the sufferings of that society, and confident of its own high destiny. Full stop. One sentence. That was one sentence. Shoghi Effendi, what a writer. My wife's mother read a paragraph of two of Shoghi Effendi when she first met Baha'is, and she said, it's finished. No one can write English like this unless they're inspired by God. I believe in this. Just immediately. She ended up pioneering in Honduras for 25 years. The subsequent pilgrim pioneers that went there and traveled around the country, they would go to these very remote areas feeling proud of themselves, and they'd say, we're Baha'is. And they'd say, oh, how is Juanita? Because she'd been there before on horseback or donkey back. I don't know. Amazing lady. Now, I wanted to move from that to a message of the Guardian that was written in July of 1950. So you can imagine what kind of a message this was. It was 100 years after the martyrdom of the Bab. And he was highlighting the sacredness of that occasion. But in the process, he gives us insight into the influence, the extension of these energies of the Bab, released by the Bab, and what they've done in the world. Let's see if we can follow some of this. It will enhance again our vision. It will awaken us and draw us closer to a vision of the Bab appropriate for the coming bicentenary. He addresses it to the assembled representatives of the American Baha'i community gathered beneath the dome of the most holy house of worship in the Baha'i world. Why is the Wilmette, the Chicago temple, the most holy house of worship in the Baha'i world? He tells us because Abdul Baha himself laid the cornerstone of that house of worship. Makes it unique. It makes it a shrine. The Shoghi Effendi said it's a shrine as well as a house of worship. And it's the mother house of worship because of that spreads all over the world. He talks about his feelings. He's sharing his feelings of profound emotion evoked by this historic occasion of the worldwide commemoration of the first centenary of the martyrdom of the Blessed Bab. Prophet and herald of the faith of Baha'u'llah. Again, this twofold mission that we've talked about. Founder of the dispensation, the Bab, founder of the dispensation marking the culmination of the 6,000-year-old Adamic cycle. Inaugurator of the 5,000-century Baha'i cycle. Poignantly called to mind the circumstances attending the last act, consummating the tragic ministry of the master hero of the most sublime drama in the religious annals of mankind, signalizing the most dramatic event of the most turbulent period of the heroic age of the Baha'i dispensation. Destined to be recognized by posterity as the most precious, momentous sacrifice in the world's spiritual history. Granted, here he is, the king of the messengers of God, and he gives his life in such a spirit. On the occasion, Shoghi Effendi writes, recall the peerless, this is in Kabylese language, so it's not quite full English. Recall the peerless tributes paid to his memory by the founder of the faith, acclaiming him the monarch of God's messengers, the primal point around whom the realities of all the prophets circle in adoration. My God. Then, profoundly stirred by the memory, and he lists nine points, which if you go back to the message, you can sort out one by one, because you need to think and reflect on what the origin of this phrase is, what's behind this. The agonies he suffered, the glad tidings he announced, the warnings he uttered, the forces he set in motion, the adversaries he converted, the disciples he raised up, the conflagrations he precipitated, the legacy he left of faith and courage, the love he inspired. These are the focus of Shoghi Effendi's attention. And so profoundly stirred, he said, by the memory of these things. Acknowledge with bowed head, joyous, thankful heart, the successive, marvelous evidence of his triumphant power in the course of the 100 years elapsed since the last crowning act of his meteoric ministry. He's preparing us to tell us what's been the outcome and effect of the Bab's ministry. Then he goes on, he says, the creative energies released at the hour of the birth of his revelation, endowing mankind with the potentialities of the attainment of maturity. And here it flips, he says, are deranging during the present transitional age the equilibrium of the entire planet as the inevitable prelude to the consummation in world unity of the coming of age of the human race. I don't think we all realize how much the chaos in the world is due to the revelation of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. These energies go forth to establish world unity. If they're met with opposition, they produce chaos. If they're met with acceptance, they have divine confirmation. The Bab says in one place, the verse of God goes out. If the believer receives it, if a soul, a human soul receives it, it is light and blessing to him. If he refuses it, it turns to darkness. So this is what's happened to the world. The proclamation has gone out and we've all done our best. We're trying to do our best anyway, to diffuse it in the world. And it produces reactions of various sorts in individuals and in collectivities, in governments, in movements in the world. All of this is stirring up and breaking down the old world order. A careful study of Shoghi Effendi's writings revealed to what degree the disintegration, the process of disintegration, is related to the energies released by the revelation itself. Read the foreword to God Passes By. It's so clearly stated there. This is also a confirmation of what we were talking about that Keith Ransom Kaler heard from Shoghi Effendi. The energies released have endowed mankind with the potentialities of attaining maturity. There it is. That's the promise. Then he talks about the portentous but unheeded warnings addressed to kings, princes, ecclesiastics are responsible for the successive overthrow of 14 monarchies of East and West, the collapse of the institution of the caliphate, the virtual extinction of the Pope's temporal authority. Temporal authority, he was the ruler of lands as well as the ruler of the church. But all of that through revolution was taken away from him. And this Pope Pius IX, who received the message of Baha'u'llah, to whom the message of Baha'u'llah was addressed, suffered the greatest humiliations. The Italian forces that were in opposition to him marched on the Vatican. He was seen on the steps of St. Peter's on his knees praying to God to stop the attack. And they came and they surrounded, and finally he had to raise a white flag over the Vatican, over St. Peter's, and give over his kingdom to these forces. Virtual extinction of the Pope's temporal authority. He goes on, he says, the progressive decline in the fortunes of the ecclesiastical hierarchies of Islamic, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrians, and Hindu faiths. Then he mentions the order. He says the order eulogized and announced in his writings. You remember In a previous session, we quoted this passage from the Bayan in which it said, "Well is it with him who reacheth to the order of Baha'u'llah," which was both a prophecy of the coming world order of Baha'u'llah, of which the administrative order is the embryo, and also, I don't remember now. This is called senior moment, friends. I presume he'll tell me later, or I'll see it in the text somewhere. Anyway, this order eulogized and announced in his writings, in the Bab's writings, whose laws Baha'u'llah subsequently revealed in the Most Holy Book, whose features Abdul-Baha delineated in his testament, is now passing through its embryonic stage through the emergence of the initial institutions of the world administrative order in the 5 continents of the globe. So this is now 1950, Shoghi Effendi's painting this divine picture for us all. The clarion call sounded in the Qayyum al-Asma, summoning the peoples of the West to forsake their homes and proclaim his message. This is in the very first chapter of the Qayyum al-Asma. Was nobly answered by the communities of the Western Hemisphere, headed by the valorous, stalwart American believers, the chosen vanguard of the all-conquering, irresistibly marching army of the faith in the Western world. The embryonic faith, maturing 3 years after his martyrdom, traversing the period of infancy in the course of the heroic age of the faith, is now steadily progressing towards maturity in the present formative age, destined to attain full stature in the golden age of the Baha'i dispensation. These, of course, 3 ages that we're all familiar with or should become familiar with: the heroic age, the formative age, and the golden age. Lastly, the holy seed of infinite preciousness, holding within itself incalculable potentialities, representing the culmination of the century-old process of the evolution of humanity through the energies released by progressive revelations, starting with Adam and concluded by the revelation of the seal of the prophets. He's painting a picture of something that's coming from the past, right? Marked by the successive appearance of the branches, leaves, buds, blossoms, and plucked after 6 brief years by the hand of destiny, this fruit of the whole earlier process set in motion from Adam, ending now in this perfect fruit. That fruit then, its seed ground in the mill of martyrdom and oppression, produced an oil which flamed up in the heart and being of Baha'u'llah. Look at this progression from the beginning, from Adam right up to the light that comes from Baha'u'llah. In such a setting, the somber, subterranean walls of the Said Shah of Tehran. A flame whose flickering light gathered brilliance in Baghdad and finally shone in full resplendency in its crystal globe in Adrianople, whose rays warmed and illuminated the fringes of the American, European, Australian continents through the tender ministerings of the center of his covenant, whose radiance is now overspreading the surface of the globe during the present formative age. Follow the sequence of the light. It's come from the Bab, then produces this oil, that light in Baha'u'llah, then it's proclaimed to the kings. Then Abdul-Baha, through his divine plan, sends out to propagate this light across the surface of the globe, and it reaches all the rest of us at that point. Its full splendor is destined in the course of future millenniums to suffuse the entire planet. I want to stop here for a moment, friends, and direct our attention to three words: infuse, diffuse, and suffuse. Infuse was the release of the divine energies by the Bab and Baha'u'llah into the world of human consciousness, into the realm of this earth and its potentialities during the heroic age of the faith. With the latter years of Baha'u'llah's ministry, and more particularly with Abdul Baha and then Shoghi Effendi's ministries, this light was directed by them to be diffused across the whole face of the earth. I was reading the other day a letter of the Guardian to a pioneer couple who'd gone to an island and after some time of sacrifice had to leave the island. And Shoghi Effendi said to them that though they hadn't seen any visible consequence, nobody had accepted the faith on the island, their sacrifice had diffused the light of the revelation over the whole island, and now that light would continue to act there and would bring forth seeds and give its fruition in the future. Friends, this is what we're doing. Sometimes we go with all good feelings to open a place or to give the message of the cause. This is what we're commanded to do. We're not commanded to have victories. That's in His hands. We're commanded to go forth sacrificially and offer the cause. But we have to realize that even as the prayers we say in the privacy of our chamber, there are angels waiting to capture the light of our having repeated these divine words in this realm, in this lower realm, and they diffuse it to the hearts of receptive souls around us. Miraculous things going on. You think you're saying your morning prayers and you're all alone. You're not alone. Hosts of angels are waiting, and they diffuse it and carry it into the neighborhood. I mean, we're talking about neighborhoods. This is a good policy, the repetition of the verses of God, morning and evening. All these efforts, and that's why it somehow helps us to concentrate at times to say these things out loud. Though it's not required to fulfill the law, it is very helpful to help us concentrate, Abdul Baha says. Then, after the diffusion of this light, which has really taken place with the fulfillment of carrying the light of the cause, diffusing the light of God to all the territories mentioned in the divine plan, now we are approaching with a new culture a process of suffusing, letting that light enter into the very life of our communities and transform them. Infusion of the energies, diffusion of the light, penetration and suffusion of that light into the life of the whole of human society. This is the process, I think, that's being referred to here. He elaborates in a few additional paragraphs where he, again, similarly to the passage that I read previously from God Passes By, summarizes how far the faith has gone since the appearance and sacrifice of the Bab. And finally, he at the end appeals to the friends, and through those friends and through that occasion to all of us. I appeal on this solemn occasion, at this anxious hour in the fortunes of this travailing age, to the entire body of the believers, to rededicate themselves and resolve, no matter how great the perils confronting their sister communities on the European, Asiatic, African, and Australian continents, however somber the situation facing both the cradle of the faith and its world center, however grievous the vicissitudes they themselves may eventually suffer, to hold aloft unflinchingly the torch of the faith, impregnated with the blood of innumerable martyrs, and transmit it unimpaired, so that it may add luster to future generations who will labor after them. The Guardian's appeal on a very important centenary, fully applicable, I think, friends, to this commemoration and celebration of the bicentenary of the birth of the Bob that we're approaching. Thank you.